When it comes to large aquarium fish, Oscar cichlids can be wonderful fish to keep. They've got great personalities, they're fun to interact with, they're almost like little water puppies or kind of your fun wet pet. Now, a lot of people have asked me over the years, what are some different types of fish that you can keep with your Oscars? So today I thought I would make a video and give you some potential tank mates on the Oscar cichlid. Hey fish friends, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Zenzo from Tazawa Tanks. Now before I get into the list, I just want to share with you that these are my opinions. There are lots of fish that you can keep with Oscars, and there's a lot of fish that you shouldn't keep with Oscars. We're not going to get into too much detail. I'm going to go through just several fish that may work well in your situation. Now keep in mind that Oscars are animals, and they do have personalities, so what works for one may not work for another. So some of them are cranky, some of them are mean, some of them are bullies, some of them are peaceful, some of them like to get along. So it really is going to depend on the personality of your specific fish. But for the most part, a lot of these that I'm going to recommend would work in your situation. Now there are a few things that you are going to want to consider before going out and buying some of these fish for your Oscar tank. First thing you're going to want to consider is the tank size. So thinking about the tank that you have, is it large enough to have an Oscar or a couple of Oscars and some of these other fish? If you have a 55-gallon aquarium or a 75-gallon aquarium, if you have one or two Oscars in there, you're probably kind of maxed out as far as what you can keep in there, maybe like one bottom dwelling fish or something like that. But for the most part, you're not going to want to have a lot of fish in that aquarium because of the size and because of the bioload. The next thing you're going to want to consider is bioload, right? So it's a lot of maintenance if you have more fish in an aquarium. So you have these big fish, you add a lot more fish, and then you have more waste, more water changes, more filter maintenance, etc. So it's something else to consider. And the last thing, which I kind of touched on earlier as far as the behavior of the fish, is aggression. Some of you might have Oscars that are aggressive, so some of these fish may not work, or none of the fish would work. Or some of the fish that I recommend might be a little bit aggressive, and so they may not work well and interact with your Oscar cichlid. So these are things to consider as you look at these fish. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this into three categories. Category one is a dither fish. The next category is a bottom dwelling fish, and the last category we will talk about is other cichlids. Now dither fish are fish that usually swim around in groups, like they'll school or they'll shoal, and basically what they do is they do a couple of things. So one, because there's a larger group of them and they kind of swim around and occupy a lot of the water column, they will distract fish to kind of make them not think about aggression, or they will make fish feel more comfortable because instead of hiding, they look up and they say, oh, there's a bunch of other fish swimming around, so it's okay for me to come out of my hiding spot. So that's kind of what dither fish do, kind of the short version. So the first dither fish that I would recommend is going to be the silver dollar. Now I actually happen to have a group of silver dollars back here. You can probably see them. I'll put some B-roll up. The silver dollars are a fun fish to have. They do get pretty big, and a lot of these fish are going to be pretty big, again, because our Oscars are large, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 inches, whatever. They can be quite big, so we want to make sure that any of these fish are large enough to hold their own, not get eaten, etc. So the silver dollars will be anywhere from about 5 or 6 inches to 7 or 8 inches in length, and they kind of have a round silver dollar shape, which is why they're called silver dollars. They do well in larger groups, so minimum of probably 5 or 6 or so in your Oscar tank is going to make them feel more comfortable, and you're also going to get that schooling effect where they will swim around back and forth. They are very fast, so make sure again that you have a large enough aquarium to house these larger fish that can move fast. I wouldn't recommend putting them in a 75-gallon tank or 55-gallon tank with your Oscar cichlid because there's not really enough space. Another thing to consider with the silver dollars is you're not going to do well with having plants in your aquarium because plants are part of their diet. They are omnivores, but they will readily go after plants and vegetables, things like that. So if you have plants in your aquarium, most likely you probably don't have plants in your aquarium with Oscars anyway, but if you happen to be one of those few people that have been successful in keeping live plants in an Oscar tank, having silver dollars in there is probably not going to be great, as they will probably eat your plants. The next dither fish that I'm going to recommend is the tinfoil barb. Now the tinfoil barb is a barb. They like to, again, do well in groups. and this dither fish category is kind of that group category. And they can get quite large too, so you're going to want to keep them in groups. They actually get larger than the silver dollars. They can get 8, 10, 12 inches, maybe even larger in some situations. So you're going to want to have a minimum of a 6-foot tank to have these in there. So 125 minimum, 180 gallon, 240 gallon, etc. A larger aquarium for your Oscars and your tinfoil barbs. And then the last fish that I'm going to recommend in the dither fish category is the bala shark. Now the bala shark is a very common fish that you can find in pretty much any fish store, small fish store, large big box chain stores, etc. And sometimes people buy them that shouldn't be buying them because the bala sharks get large as well. So they look really cool, you know, when you see them in the aquarium, and they kind of have that shark look to them. They're not real sharks, but they kind of have that shark look to them with that dorsal fin and the silver and black on them, and quite stunning in some situations. But they can get big, so they can get easily a foot long or larger in a lot of situations. So you'll want to make sure again that you have a larger aquarium for your bala sharks. Again, I would recommend a 6-foot tank at least, or larger if you have the space, an 8-foot tank like a 240, but a minimum of a 6-foot tank for your bala sharks. Another thing about the bala sharks is they do like to be in groups, so you'll want to have a few of them as well. Again, needing that larger tank. And they are very fast swimmers, and they can kind of crash around a little bit. So you want to make sure that you don't have them in a situation where the tank's too small and they're going to swim and crash into the glass or a decoration. You're going to want to have enough space in your tank for them to swim around and back and forth. They do get large, as I shared, and they can jump and crash out of the lid. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a secure, strong, well-fit lid and not something where the fish can jump out. The next category, pretty self-explanatory. Bottom dwellers. The bottom dwellers is going to be a fish that occupies the bottom part of the tank. Usually that's going to be like a catfish. So there are lots of different catfish that are out there, and we're not going to go through, you know, the dozens and dozens and dozens of species of catfish, but just a few that come to mind that might work well for them. You could do like Synodontis in there. I have Synodontis in this aquarium. I think I have 3 pretty large Synodontis in there. You could do things like a Raphael catfish. You could do like Pictus catfish if they're large enough. Pictus catfish are beautiful catfish, that silver color with those black spots on them and the big eyes. They're pretty much on nocturnal catfish, but something like that would work, again, if they're large enough. Any of the catfish that you're going to put in this aquarium, you want to make sure that they are large enough to not get eaten, large enough to fend for themselves, to not get bothered by other fish, by the Oscars. Because if you have a fish that's too small and it has barbels like most catfish do, if that Oscar goes and eats or tries to eat a small catfish, you're going to have a dead catfish and a dead Oscar, because the barbels are going to get stuck in the Oscar and both will die. So make sure that any of these fish are large enough to not get eaten ever. No matter how large your Oscar gets, you're going to want to make sure that that catfish is large enough. So lots of different catfish species out there, but just get something that's, you know, minimum maybe 6 inches or so. That way you're not going to have that issue. So nothing like Corydoras or anything like that. And then Plecostomus. Plecostomus do very well in Oscar tanks, usually because they don't get bothered at all. Again, if they're large enough, if they've got, you know, armor plating on them, like a common pleco as an example, those get big, but big tanks, big fish, they do quite well. That's a good option. So whatever Plecostomus that you choose, just make sure again that it's going to be big enough to not be bothered by the Oscar. The Oscar's not going to try to eat it, and pretty much it's going to occupy a dark, hidden corner of the aquarium during the daytime and probably come out in the nighttime. So make sure with any of these bottom dwelling fish, for the most part, they like to have hiding places. So, you know, under a decoration, under some fake plants, under, you know, a piece of wood or something like that, so that they have their own kind of hiding place, so to speak, so that they can be left alone during the daytime. Now, if you've been staring at this cool t-shirt and wondering what it is, you're right, it is a really cool t-shirt. This is a Polaroid, and I'm a big camera nerd, so I love this shirt, but it's a perfect time for me to pause and thank today's sponsor, Into the AM. Into the AM is a team of artists and creators that formed an apparel company to share a common vision of developing premium apparel that elevates self-expression while focusing on comfort by using the highest quality materials and eco-friendly inks. Into the AM has dozens of cool designs like this shirt that I'm wearing right now, like this one of my favorites, like this one, this cool jellyfish tee, like this one that glows in the dark, my cool Aloha shirt, and this new design along with dozens more. So if you use the code below, you'll get a 10% discount. Additionally, if you do a bundle of 3 graphic tees, you'll get them for $55 before the 10% discount. Check out Into the AM in the link below. Now the last category is probably the most controversial category and probably the most difficult category when it comes to having your Oscars with other fish. With the dither fish, with the barbs and the silver dollars, etc. For the most part, that's pretty easy. It's a different kind of fish. The Oscar doesn't necessarily see it as a threat unless they're trying to spawn, and they might chase them away like mine are doing right now with my silver dollars. But for the most part, they leave them alone, and for the most part, they'll leave alone those bottom dwellers. But other cichlids, which is the next category, is a different story. So Oscars are cichlids, and obviously if we're adding another cichlid in there, in some situations you might have a clash of the titans or a clash of the cichlids. So that is something that you might want to consider before going out and shopping for another cichlid to join your Oscar. Now the first one that I'm going to recommend is something that's very readily available and pretty fun to keep, and that's the convict cichlid. Now you might be thinking that the convict cichlid is a little bit small, and the fry will be, the baby fish, if they spawn, and they will spawn, they will be obviously small, but the adults are large enough to fend for themselves, so they're not going to be bothered by the Oscars. Pretty much what you want to make sure is you have a little space in the aquarium to have convicts kind of have their own little area, and then your Oscar can kind of inhabit, the other part of the tank. If you have a small group of convicts, you'll probably end up with a larger group because 99% of the time they're going to spawn and you're going to have babies that are born. You'll have some that you'll lose because they're going to get predated on by the other fish, which is probably okay because it'll keep the numbers down, but you're still going to have some survive from every batch of fry that the convicts have. So again, a fun fish to have. In fact, there used to be convicts in this tank, not when I owned it. So real quick, this tank is a 125-gallon, 6-foot tank that used to belong to a client of mine when I had my aquarium service business. That they closed their office, they gave me the tank and all the fish, and there was a bunch of convicts in there and some other fish, which we'll talk about shortly, and one of the Oscars in there. So convicts did live in this tank at one time, just not here at this house. So anyway, convicts would be an option. The next option is a beautiful fish, not too aggressive, and that's the firemouth cichlid. Firemouth cichlid kind of has that really brilliant red throat and mouth area, hence the name firemouth. And they would do well in a tank with Oscars. Again, just making sure that you have your own little, or they have their own little space in the aquarium to get away and kind of carve out their own little territory. So for the most part, I've never really seen any issues with firemouths and Oscars together. Not too much of a clash between those two, again, as long as they have their own space. If you're looking for a larger cichlid to join your Oscar, but maybe something that's not so aggressive, one option would be the Severum. Now, Severums are really beautiful. They come in a few different color variants, and they get to be pretty large, and for the most part, for a larger cichlid, they're pretty peaceful. So you're not going to usually have a situation where the Severum's attacking the Oscar, unless you've got like a breeding pair that's trying to chase something away. But for the most part, they're going to leave each other alone, and as long as your Oscars, plays nice, they can cohabitate quite well. The next fish that I'm going to recommend is probably hit and miss. It might work in a lot of situations, and it may not work in some situations, and that's a jewel cichlid. Now, a jewel cichlid is from a completely different continent than a lot of these other fish that I recommended as far as cichlids are concerned. The jewel cichlid is a fish that comes from West Africa, from the rivers, etc. And they are really beautiful, hence the name jewel. They come in different variants, different species. Some of them can be pretty aggressive, like my 5-star generals. Some of them a little bit less aggressive. Now, again, just like the convicts, they're a little bit smaller, or quite a bit smaller than the Oscar, but again, they're going to be tough enough to fend for themselves. In some situations, you might even see the jewels, if they've paired up and they've got some eggs laid or some fry that they're taking care of, they may chase the Oscar away. So again, your mileage may vary depending on your fish and the tank space, but I have seen jewel cichlids live with Oscars, and it's quite beautiful if it works. And then the last one that I would recommend, and this is just kind of like with a caveat, again, this is going to depend on your fish and these fish, and that's going to be some of the larger cichlids like a Jack Dempsey or a Green Terror. Now, remember I told you the story about this tank and how it used to have convicts. It also used to have a Jack Dempsey in there, and it used to have a Green Terror. And when I was given the tank, I was given all of those fish. I ended up rehoming them at one of the local fish stores here where I live. And part of me kind of wishes that I kept them just for fun, because it would have been nice to have them, but at that time I didn't want to have all those mismatch of fish in here. So I gave those away, but they did live with the Oscar for quite some time together peacefully. So again, it's going to depend on your fish, and whether your Jack Dempsey is nice or not, whether your green terror is nice or not, and whether your Oscar is nice or not. But again, if you have a large enough space, and if you have enough places for them to kind of have their own territory, then it may work. Usually what will happen is if you have a fish that's, let's say you get an Oscar, and the Oscar might be 6 inches long or so, kind of medium juvenile size, and you introduce another fish, another cichlid like a green terror or Jack Dempsey. If you also bring it in at that juvenile state, you might be okay. If you have a full-grown, foot-long Oscar, and then you go to add something, that's probably where you're going to have some issues. So anyway, I hope that this list was helpful for you. I did go through quite a bit of fish, but there's lots of other fish that we didn't cover. Oddball fish like rope fish and knife fish, you know, things like bichers, lots of other fish out there that may work or may not work. Again, these are just some ideas. These are just my opinions. I'm not saying that this is going to work if you buy these fish. You might have battle royale, or it might be perfectly peaceful harmony. I would love to read down below in the comments what type of fish you keep with your Oscars, if I've inspired you to keep anything with your Oscars, or if you are planning on keeping something. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you have not done so already, please consider subscribing to my channel. That's all I had for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.